Stanford University.
So welcome back. It's wonderful to have you all, and I'm really excited to be in practice with you all today. Lama Rod, there was a question in the thread about proximity to power. Do you want to riff off of that with me for a second?
Sure.
You go into your space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instead of thinking about my identity politics, and it's not like I don't think about my identity. Obviously, I'm in a Black Studies department, Africana Studies. I think about race all the time. But how does proximity to power kind of change how you think about identity for you, Rod?
Yeah, I've written about this in my current book, Love and Rage, but I'm always struggling to really name my, I want to say my fixation to power, because power exists. And that's like the first law, power exists, you know? And if I don't have power, then I'm, in certain cases, particularly thinking about social structure, I am suffering, And so I am really interested in some form of power to bypass the experience of oppression, because growing up, oppression was the absence of power, you know? But when you think within communities of marginalization and within the communities within oppressed communities, like we're still creating hierarchies of power and jockeying to have positionalities. I think about, Black community, it's like we were always creating power structures around skin tone, around what side of town you lived, and if you, yeah, hair, you know, and how well you spoke your English, you know. And so I had to like really start divesting from that at the same time realizing that I carry a heap of power. I carry a large amount of authority, and for me, I often try to think about power as how I gather resources.
To gather those resources, effort you have to put in.
Yep. So I think that we have, particularly on the justice end of our communities, we have a lot of ambiguity around power. We have a lot of like nervousness and anxiety around power. At the same time, while people are accumulating power within movement spaces at the same time. And I just think the point of my practice and my teaching is to name the things we struggle to name, to articulate the things, that we just struggle to articulate. That's what we were doing last night in the talk. That's why it's so uncomfortable, and we want to skip into our intellect, which is this white supremacist kind of modality. We're going to skip into the intellect and to step out of the body, to step out of the experience, because we actually can't deal with the discomfort of the ambiguity. We can't deal with the complexity of things, so we have to oversimplify it, and we use the mind to do that. The mind can do anything. The mind can go to the future, it can go back to the past, it can bullshit, it could create new narratives, but the body is happening in the moment. And the body only has one language, and it's always in the present. It may be responding to something that's happened in the past, but it's still happening in the present. Like this sensation is happening right now.
The body only speaks in one tense.
Yeah, in present, yeah. This is why when we're doing embodiment practice, yoga being an example of an embodiment practice, that when we start bringing awareness back into the body, it's so countercultural, because the body will slow us down. The body will disrupt, as you were pointing out with Sojourner, Like it will disrupt these convenient notions of time. Like time is something in white supremacist culture that we can manipulate, we can speed up, and we can change, but the body isn't into that. The body is moving in its own time, and it has no agenda. It's not trying to get anywhere. you know. For those of us who have survived, academic spaces, higher academic spaces, we are taught disembodiment, because the mind has to move quicker than the body. And this is why many of us leave these academic spaces sick and traumatized, you know. And we get addicted to that because we find sometimes some of us are like, well, my life is a lot easier if I can just intellectualize everything, But intellectualization is really how we sustain systems of abuse, power, and violence. You know, Patriarchy is this intellectual pursuit, that's always forcing us away from the body. You know, but power, like going back to that proximity to power, this is all about how we're gathering resources. And we talked about this kind of intellectual elitism as well. That's also a way that we gather resources. I'm going to outthink you. I'm going to use big words to do that as well. And we choose not to meet people where they are, but we choose to maintain this space above and away from folks. And all I'm saying at the end of the day is that, like, it's power. It's okay to have power, but what I'm actually interested in is how we're using power to bypass who and what we are, to bypass our most authentic selves. You know, I'm interested in our hearts breaking and showing up to the brokenheartedness and using that as the ground from which we do our movement organizing. Like how we create communities, how we create places of belonging. Like I want us to talk about what hurts, and I have to, in order to do that, like I have to let go of wanting to dominate you, but I have to reinvest in the practice of meeting you where you are, because if I meet you where you are, you can meet me where I am, you know, and that's what we're missing right now. Um, and I think that, it's so easy for some of us to gain access to resources through identity politics. It's like I can name all these parts of who I am, right? And because I can name them, I can place myself closer to certain issues, and I become an authority on these issues, right? But people who are closest to these issues aren't necessarily that interested in the liberation of everyone. You know, like I practice Black Lives Matter, which is what, of course, Radical Dharma emerged from for us. Like I'm interested in the value of Black lives because I'm interested in the liberation of everyone. You know, but we have to pay attention to those lives in our world and our culture who are most disprivileged, who are most marginalized. You know, you're exerting power over me in a way that's harmful is actually much more about your captivity than it is about mine. It's much more about your need to create communities of safety and rigidity, you know, um, and that creates a stronger, tighter cage for you than it does for me. You know, I don't know if that answers the question, but you know, I just like open my mouth and just start talking, and somehow the answer emerges, or it doesn't. Or you can just say, I'm like this really gifted, profound teacher, and that maybe you're just not advanced enough to understand what I'm talking
You're not.
about. That's a spiritual teacher, Jedi mind trick. Oh, you just don't get it yet. You haven't, you haven't made it to this level of realization. Once you get there, you'll get it. You're gonna be like, oh, that's all that was.
It's interesting because it is very brass tacks. Like,
Yeah,
what is our access to resources for our survival,
yeah,
right?
hmm,
And then what do we think of as survival, right?
yeah,
Like, so what is the baseline?
yeah,
And are we accountable to others than ourselves? Like,
yes,
that's what really starts to break us out of that
hmm,
kind of narrow understanding of our proximity to power, because
hmm,
kind of ways that we internalize and inherit notions and narratives of privilege are all about personal possession.
yeah,
Right?
hmm,
Like that proximity to power isn't something I can like give to someone else
yeah,
in this narrative, but
hmm,
in fact it is. I do it all the time,
hmm,
right?
hmm,
And it becomes very
yeah,
easy once you realize, like in the Matrix,
yeah,
right, that our relationships are mutable. Our
yeah,
relationships to power are mutable.
hmm,
And it's a kind of power. We do this work, we do a lot of different kinds of embodied practices
hmm,
in radical Dharma spaces. And one of them is based in, some of them are based in embodied practices that are really about learning to wield your power
yeah,
wisely. I'm trying not to
yeah,
go into a whole like takedown of that particular practice because we
hmm,
have other ones, but for you today. But how do you hold your power
hmm,
from a place of love?
hmm,
We're so used to coding privilege
hmm,
in this space of shame. I feel bad about my privilege. I feel
yeah,
bad about my proximity. And when I
right,
say proximity to power as a political scientist,
right,
I'm talking about economic,
yeah,
political, social capital,
yeah,
right? Like,
hmm,
what are the things that you are wielding that
hmm,
help you get the things that you need to survive in the world and make sure that the
hmm,
folks that you care about are also taken care of?
yeah,
Just, material analysis based.
yeah,
There are other forms of power.
yeah,
There are incredibly ancient forms of
hmm,
power. When I'm talking about proximity to power, I am invoking those things, but more so, I'm
hmm,
centering the ways power is affirmed, accumulated, and reproduced
yeah,
in the material world that we have created,
yeah,
co created,
yeah, yeah,
and participated.
yeah. And that deep secret that we fail to articulate is that, like, we power makes us feel comfortable, you know, like there's a comfort there,
Right.
you know. Um, I Power is always happening, regardless of what I do to interrupt it or not. Like, power is always happening, you know. Privilege and disprivilege is always happening without my consent, you know. I often think in terms of agency, like self agency. Like, how do I be in power with myself?
Mm,
And I'm always doing this work of turning that lens inward and doing this internal work, because I think that it's the internal work that creates the conditions for us to manifest outwardly. And if I haven't done the work, as we were talking about last night, if I don't have an awareness of my own complexity, I won't ever be able to understand the complexity of the world around me.
that's right.
And I think the past 24 hours have revealed that, definitely, that, like, we're failing at complexity. you know it's either or, and I'm like, no, it's actually the space in between that I'm really interested in. That's where the complexity is. But that complexity is only going to reveal back to us the fact that, like, we're not as holy and sanctified as we think we are. We're not these as good and virtuous as we believe we are. We're actually There's a lot of shadow for us. And you can't get free. We talk about liberation, like, you can't get free until you are in a relationship to the shadow as well, right? And that self agency, that's being empowered with myself, I have the agency to move into a relationship with these things that scare me. And I have to I have to own that for myself. Like I have to own the fact that I am the only one who can make a choice to be in a relationship with these parts of myself. If I don't make that choice, then I'm always moving through the world, giving up agency and complaining how I have no consent with anything. You know? And it's interesting to think about that. Like there can be liberation even within a system of oppression. I can be marginalized and oppressed within a system, but I can actually choose to be free at the same time. That's complex as hell, you know. You know, but it takes practice to get there. This is the thing that I just, I don't know, as I get older, I feel like I'm becoming an elder. And I'm like, when did that happen? I feel like an old man sitting on the cushion talking about y'all need to practice, y'all need to meditate, y'all need to be, we've, Yasmin and I, we've done like everything. We've been on the streets, we've been doing organizing, we've been sitting on the cushion, like you have to go through the process, because it's about creating what I call in my work like a theory of liberation. Like you need to really construct your theory. Like, what does it mean for me to be liberated? You know, how do I use power to gather resources if I need to get free? You know, knowing that I also have to hold space for all the contradictions that arise. The closer you get to liberation, the more contradiction you're going to have to deal with. And that can be uncomfortable. Sometimes, you get to that point where you're like, you know what, I don't know why I'm making this decision. It doesn't make sense. It's really confusing, but I have to do it. And I can't explain it. You know? um, there's a lot of discomfort that we have to sit with. You know, there's a wisdom that comes out of sitting with that, and that wisdom helps us to make the choices and
Following
how
the
to deal with
path
it.
of our own dissatisfaction.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and you talk about abolition, and just like abolition, even though I'm not a scholar on this, I'm not a scholar on anything, except for like, I don't know, avoiding doing work maybe. But I think that um, abolition was more than just the work in this world, but it was the work of other worlds coming together, you know. And that's I occupy what I call the Indigenous Worldview, which means that I see the world in terms of energy and beings and consciousness and deities and gods, that inanimate objects are imbued with a level of consciousness that we have to respect, and honor. That the earth is a living being, is a consciousness, right? And everything is working towards the liberation of all beings, right? you know so right now, like, we're experiencing this, we think it's political warfare, but it's actually also spiritual warfare. you know
Yeah, I
Uh,
was talking about that on Thursday night as
yeah,
well.
yeah. We're in the heart of spiritual warfare, and this is why things don't make sense on one level. you know um and it doesn't mean that, like, oh, like, it's not about forcing us. If we're like atheist or agnostic or something, it's not forcing us to take a worldview that's counter to what we value. It's just this kind of invitation to say, what, maybe there's more happening than what I see. You know, um, it's going to take more than voting to change a system. You know, as I grew up in a community where the elders would routinely fast, you know, and they would just like pray in the closet. And they're going to be like, you know, I'm going to be here a few days. And of course, the young people were like, what? You know? Everyone was like, you have to pray about it. You have to fast. You know, I was like, I don't think so. And then all of a sudden, I'm in a life where I'm telling people to do that seriously. No, you just have to pray. Like, where's your prayer at? You know, that's just my worldview again. You know, that's not a worldview I force on people necessarily, but like that's just one that helps me to make meaning out of all of this, you know? And also with power, I want to be in power with the phenomenal world. I don't want to dominate the phenomenal world. You know, like what does it
It's
mean to be in power?
powerful. Yeah, we
Yeah,
don't have a Greek word for that. We have compassion to feel with.
yeah, yeah.
Have
Yeah.
that be in power with word.
Yeah. You know, I want to be in power with the land. I want to be in power with the air. I want to be in power with all the elements, right? You know, with the sunshine. I want to be in power with the sunshine. I'm not trying to dominate you. I just want to experience you. As I experience you, I experience myself. That's what we're so far away from experiencing ourselves. And if we can't experience ourselves, we'll never experience what freedom feels like. Like I just, you know, part of me, you know, when I think about freedom struggle and freedom movement, I just think so much of this is about how do I return back to my most authentic self? And our most authentic self isn't about violence and domination and conquering. It really isn't. You know, I believe in the inherent virtue and goodness of all beings. I trust that, even though you may be like the most evil person who has ever manifested in the world, right? Like maybe you have that label, but I still believe in your goodness. Like I have to, you know, because I believe in my goodness. And to be in power with myself means that like I am not trying to position myself as being more important than you are. I'm saying that we are actually quite the same. We may have different levels of wisdom and clarity, but we're still starting with the basic condition of goodness and virtue. You know, I think that really that helps to form like my kind of positionality in Buddhism. You know, it's like a basic tenet for me.